Hey, everybody, welcome to Spirituality for Your Mother. This is episode 5 of season 1, and I'm with the Reverend Donald Guffey, who is a friend of mine who has a similar background to me in many ways. But I have just fallen in love with this human being who is kind and compassionate and caring and gives a darn about humanity, and it's just a healer. And I'm excited to talk a little bit about spirituality. And Donald, I'd love for you to tell the world who you are, and then we'll throw some more questions at you.
Sure. Well, as Beck said, I'm Donald Guffey. I am 38 and I live in Western North Carolina, Appalachian to the core. My accent doesn't give me away. And I am an ordained interfaith minister as well as what's the full, let me try to remember the full name of it, a Holy Fire 3 Karuna Reiki Master teacher. As well as a just an overall spiritual seeker, and I dibble dabble in a little bit of everything. If you had to really hold me down and say what's your religion, I would probably say Unitarian Universalism. It's the only one so far that can seem to hold all the quirks that I have.
All the beautiful facets that you are. Well, I'd love for you to tell people a little bit about your spiritual journey, and how you kind of went from, being a Pentecostal to experiencing freedom and breath and just the newness and where you're finding yourself at today.
Sure. Well, I'm going to go all the way back to my Pentecostal days. It runs very deep. My entire family is Pentecostal, cradle Pentecostal, that ultimately goes back to a woman named Melissa Cook, who was my great grandmother's grandmother. I don't believe there was a Pentecostal church in her part of the mountains in like the Bakersville, Spruce Pine area at when she was young, but she prayed for a spiritual experience of the Holy Ghost. She got it. She didn't know what it was when she got it. And along the way, she discovered that she was a healer, and she did some prayer work with God. She had a special rock that she would go and pray at outside of her property, which I have a piece of. I actually went into the woods to find it. And there was a rock that just happened to break off of it. And she wanted to know if she was a healer. So she prayed to God and said, if this is my true calling, then all this ground that I stand on to pray in, don't let any grass ever grow. And none ever did until she died. So she was actually put out of her church, the one she went to, because of it. She preached from her porch. The story is people would come in wagons and she would preach to them and she would lay hands and they would be healed. I believe the last family story I heard was there was over 80 confirmed healings. So that was the legacy that my great grandmother came up in. And she, of course, had a time when she didn't go to church, and then she got saved and filled with the Holy Ghost, as it goes in Pentecostal tradition. And for a while, she was a Free Will Baptist. If you're from Appalachia, you are very familiar with that, Armenian Baptists. Uh, don't think that means they're more progressive or liberal, but get to the Free Will Baptist Church of Cleveland, Tennessee. And she knew that's where she needed to be. And so in the 50s, she joined. And that began our Pentecostal legacy. My grandmother was raised in it, my mother was raised in it, and I was raised in it. Not just the same denomination, but the same church, the Old Fort Church of God. And so it runs deep in my bones. I think I did the counting, and that would make me a sixth generation Pentecostal. And so it's all I ever knew. As a matter of fact, my uncle is a Church of God bishop, and he pastored locally when I was a child, and he was invited to speak at the community's Thanksgiving service, which was at the First Baptist Church, the big First Baptist Southern Baptist Church in the town, and it's the first time I'd ever been in one. And I remember asking him, I said, "Uncle, what's the difference between a Baptist church and a regular one?" Meaning the Church of God. I didn't know anything else. So it was only natural that when I entered middle school, and I've always been the way that I am, uh, not out and proud, as it were, because I didn't have the language for that at that young. I knew that I was different very young, but uh, most of the, as often goes, the wonderful classmates and co-students in middle school clocked me before I clocked me. So that was, and you can imagine growing up in rural Appalachia, what kind of treatment that brought. So as a natural, I would say, coping mechanism, I turned to my faith, and I jumped head first into my Pentecostal faith. Now, you have to understand, too, I wasn't a typical Pentecostal teenager. I never went to youth camp. I was in a youth group at the church, but my life revolved around that one church, which really meant my life was involved by my extended family, because that church at that time was what I call a dynasty church. So my great grandmother is one of 5 sisters. 4 of them, including her, went to the church, their children, their grandchildren, their great grandchildren, and their great great grandchildren. So even in a church at its peak when I was a teenager of about 120 to 125 people, 95% of us were related. My best friend in growing up in church was my 6th cousin, who, to break it down further, was my great grandmother's twin sister's great granddaughter. So, salt for the Pentecostal experience, speaking in tongues, that whole thing, when I was 15. I felt the call to ministry when I was 16, and I was a kid that read theology books for fun. So, uh, my sweet 16 birthday, my birthday cake had the Church of God logo on it, and that's what I wanted. So to sum it up, so we can move on to another question. It's that part of my spiritual journey. It's just all I ever knew.
When do you think you felt like maybe like a palm activation, or when did you feel like you were a
Oh, that.
healer, or how did you experience that?
So there's a little booklet with the Church of God that is kind of like our book of discipline if you're Methodist, or it's how the church works as a denomination. And we have just like most evangelical denominations, a statement of faith, right? A declaration of faith. And one of those main tenets is that we say, as we said, divine healing is available to everybody within the atonement. And so laying on of hands and praying for people to be healed, anointing cloths for people. My great grandmother usually had a prayer cloth pinned to her nightgown. I mean, I thought that's just what you did. And of course, I knew people that had been healed of all kinds of things, and by the power of prayer and the laying on of hands. So it's what I always knew. You see, you have to understand, for those that may not be familiar, that are more acquainted, like with West Coast or middle United States Pentecostalism. Appalachian Pentecostalism is its own breed by itself. Um, As a matter of fact, you never really called us Pentecostal people. You called us holiness folk. And or holy rollers, if you were being derogatory about it. It was a very earthy, very really and truthfully, they would never admit this. We would never admit this, but it was very shamanic. Um, we were shouters, we were runners, we were being slain in the spirit, which is being overcome by a spirit, and you just fall down, you just collapse. Shaking and dancing, really loud. Sometimes people have asked me, it's like, what's the difference between the Church of Christ and the Church of God? The church, and I would always say, the Church of Christ doesn't believe in musical instruments. The Church of God believes if it makes a noise, we're going to use it. So, drum beats, tambourines, just these, and it was. If you've heard Pentecostal music, you know it. It's very distinct. The only thing we didn't do was handle snakes. We did not believe in that. But I had relatives that did. And so, yeah, it was just this idea that the spirit could move on a person and move through a person, talk through a person, Of course, last time I read something, I thought that was called channeling and mediumship, but I digress. If the church can make money off of it, it's okay as long as they call it a word of knowledge. But So one thing about the Pentecostal churches, we believed in being filled with the Spirit, but I don't think we ever really did well at establishing which one we meant. But yeah, so it was very hands-on, embodied faith. You used your whole self, your whole body in worship to God, to the point, right down to the clothes you wore. Like, I did grow up in, it wasn't as strict in the 90s when I was growing up, but it was still very looked down upon, like for women to wear pants to church. And most of the holiest people I knew, my perception of holiness, like my great grandmother, she never cut her hair. Once she joined in the 50s, she never cut her hair again for over 40 years. She never wore makeup. She didn't wear jewelry. She only wore skirts. As a matter of fact, if you want a visual of what she looked just like the granny from Tweety Bird. A beautiful, beautiful woman, but like the big hair, the bun, and the long skirts. And they taught that you shouldn't go to movie theaters, you shouldn't go certain places or do certain things. And by the way, let me point out, because I remember even in my most conservative days making this distinction, because around the time I was about a teenager, older teens, 19 Kids and Counting started coming on TLC. And at first I was intrigued because I was still very conservative at the time, because the girls and stuff, they dress like how I was used to seeing people dress, right? And it was about that time they introduced their beliefs about modesty, and saying that the girls are modest so the boys and the men don't lust after them. And you have to understand how conservative Pentecostalism really is. Like, you think conservative evangelicalism, honey, we're that on steroids. And so that was my mindset when I first was introduced to like the Duggars and that. And when they said that, I remember thinking, that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. Because whether they meant to or not, the memo that the women and the older people in the Church of God taught me was modesty, the way you dress, the things you do and don't do. You do so as an act of worship to God. It has nothing to do with what another person thinks or looks at you like. So, and plus, I also have to, as conservatives as we were, I do have to give us the credit that we believed fully in women ministers. The Church of God's been one Pentecostal denomination that is yet to fully allow women into every aspect of leadership. But by the time I was coming up, women most certainly could be teachers, they could be evangelists, and they could be pastors. So I also remember the first time a Baptist classmate said that women couldn't be ministers, and I'm like, well, yeah, they can. I've seen them do it. I'm like, it rocked and that shocked some people, as conservative as we were, because the idea that a woman couldn't teach a man or preach from a pulpit was completely foreign to me. And plus, not to mention, women are the Pentecostal church. It was my I would have took my great grandmother's word over any male theologian that has ever walked. And this is a woman who got married at 16 years old and didn't finish high school. Okay. So it's like grandma's word, Mama's, well, let me be Appalachian about it. Mama's word was gospel. So it's the only concept that I knew. And people would come to her door in the middle of the night. I stayed with my great grandmother every weekend from the time I was an infant until I was, gosh, almost 30. And if you saw her, most of the time you saw me. I was her favorite. And so, yeah, so one detail about me, I'm spoiled rotten. And I'm not afraid to admit it. I'm my mother's only child. I'm my grandmother's only grandson. And I was my great grandmother's favorite. So you can imagine. But I saw them pray for people for healing. People would come to Mama's door in the middle of the night in in the trailer park and want her to pray for them. I mean, they knew that I heard her. Now, she did it all the time. She always prayed and read scripture around me and stuff like that. But I only ever heard her speak in tongues twice in my life. Her prayer was pretty private and stuff. But so I know she did it all the time. And I'm telling you, it was when my mother had a particular health issue, and we were both praying for her, and Mama spoke in tongues. And I'm telling you, the God's on, as sure as I'm sitting here, the ground vibrated. That woman had a direct line. So that's kind of it. I didn't really know the channeling part until I was in seminary, Pentecostal seminary, and I snuck away and got my Reiki attunements.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about kind of the sneaking away to get to work on your certification as a Reiki healer. Like,
Okay.
first of all, how did you kind of leave the church? Well, I don't think you ever left, but like what I mean to say is how did you see Reiki
Yeah.
as a place where God was existing?
Right. So all throughout my spiritual life, I was never. It's like the spirit and like God, whatever you want to call that, never let me go too far fundamentalist. There was always little holes that would get poked. Me being a enormous feminist, for one thing. Um, Even when I was small, I had a fascination with witches. The Wicked Witch of the West was my favorite character. Oh my gosh. And then, so that's always magic and stuff has always kind of been in and out, even though I knew, of course, that wasn't acceptable and stuff. But uh, what really kind of started the transition, believe it or not, you can thank Oprah for, uh, because she had a show on her channel at the time called Super Soul Sunday. And I would flick it on every now and again while getting ready to go to church. And I remember, who was it that really first got my attention? It was Marianne Williamson and then Iyanla Van Zant. And they were introducing these ideas within New Thought metaphysics that, God is all that there is. And there's two emotions out there. There's love and there's fear. and you're acting out of one or the other at any given time. And if you want to, and if you're in a place you don't want to be in, you just have to have a new thought. And so that got me Marianne Williamson is a teacher of A Course in Miracles, a spiritual text. And that got me looking into that and looking into other new thought like Unity Church. And so those seeds were planted. I'll tell you the worst, what really truly started it was my Church of God pastor made the mistake of telling me to read The Shack. And that just blew everything open, and it made me open to reading things and listening to things that I probably never would have before. Because I was a very good rule follower. In the if they said not to do something, I didn't do it. I didn't have believe it or not, I didn't have my first kiss until I was 30 years old. Of course, that coincided with the first everything, but I was very good I was the poster child for purity culture. I never dated. And we'll get into that later on. I never dated because, one, I figured I wasn't attracted to women. And I figured that just meant I was supposed to be like Paul and just never marry and be celibate. But I never would allow myself to date women because, again, feminist. And I knew that to do that would be unfair. So I call myself a platinum star, not just a gold star. Gay. So, because there was something in me that just knew it would be so unfair to use a woman as cover. And as a result, I'm afraid that that's an area I have to pray on and really work on to show a lot of grace and empathy toward, especially other gay men in the church that have married and have had children and then come out later and just blow it all up. That I have that grace, I have that love. Sometimes it's hard because I'm like, y'all, yeah, it meant I was looked at weird, but I still did it. I still didn't ruin a woman's life to be myself. So, no shade, no tea. I think everybody's eventually got to just be themselves. And, but, yeah, that's a tangent. I don't know why I got on that. I think it's because I just see it a lot. And I know it's the system that one should be most angry at, that would force somebody to do that. Would force somebody to go against their own nature. And so, yeah, even the Reiki Rev has to work on certain areas to be as open and grace filled as I possibly can be, because that's a topic in the LGBT Christian community I don't think we talk about enough, and I don't think there's been enough accountability for. And I think it has resulted probably in the increase of homophobia within Christian straight women. And but I digress on all that. So started reading the things that I knew I shouldn't. Plus, the older I got, the more I realized, and this ties into what I was just talking about with being a gold star gay and stuff. I've always been the way I am. I knew that I was attracted to men. A lot of people won't believe this, but I knew it at 3 years old. Because my first ever crush was the fox Robin Hood from the Disney movie.
So cute.
And, I have always been more attracted to men and stuff. I just never. And here's the thing. So, like the church that I grew up in, I don't remember them ever preaching about homosexuality from the pulpit. It was just understood. And you add to that there was, unlike a lot of more Calvinistic, theobro evangelicalism, there was a very vibrant category in the Pentecostalism I grew up in for celibate people. And they were pillars of the church. I mean, my great grandmother, obviously, she was married at one time and had children, but she was widowed when she was my current age, and she never remarried again, and she never dated again. And so the entire life of several generations, like my mother never knew her grandfather. So as long as Mama's been alive and I've been alive, Mama has been a single woman, a single celibate woman, and she was a pillar of all the church, of all the main sisters. She was definitely seen as the holiest. And the older I got, the more I realized this ain't going away. Now, what's interesting is that I came to an affirming position before I ever affirmed myself.
Was that in seminary?
No, it was before. I knew going into seminary that I was pretty much who I was, and that despite listen, let me say this unequivocally. If it were possible to pray the gay away, I would have accomplished it. Okay, if it were possible to happen, I would have done it. Because few people were as devout as I was. And I knew that there was that part of me. And yeah, I would pray and say, Lord, I'll just be celibate and I'll just never worry about it. And it was so pushed down that it wasn't. I was never sent to conversion therapy. I never went to ex-gay. I went to one ex-gay conference that just happened to be in the conference center that I was working at the time. But I wasn't a full-on participant. I just went to the night services, which was Exodus. And, but, so I was never horribly persecuted, thank goodness. So that part of religious trauma didn't really hit me as hard as it could have. I'm sure there's still some religious trauma there, but it's I was fortunate enough to not endure a lot of the horror stories that I have heard from other people. But I knew going to seminary was the first time I had ever lived on my own, and I was away from my entire family. I joined an Assembly of God, much to my great grandmother's chagrin, in my early 20s, and I was licensed in the Assemblies of God. And right before I went to seminary, I was ordained in the Assemblies of God. And if any of your listeners and stuff know how the clergy hierarchy in Pentecostal churches work, you usually have something like certified minister, licensed minister, ordained minister. And an ordained minister, and in the Church of God, it was exhorter, ordained, and bishop. And in the Church of God, women cannot be bishops. But in the Assembly of God, they can be everything. And being ordained means you have full voting rights and stuff within the denomination. So I had achieved the peak of it. And I'd left all that behind to go to seminary, and I went to Pentecostal Theological in Cleveland. And if you are Pentecostal, you know about Cleveland, Tennessee, because it is the world headquarters of the Church of God. It is the world headquarters of the Church of God of Prophecy, and it is the epicenter of various church ministries. Judy Jacobs' church was there. T.L. Lowry's church was there. Perry Stone's church was there. It's very much the epicenter of Pentecostal and charismatic Christianity. It doesn't get more Vatican City than that in our movement. And I went to the seminary with the Church of God, and this was in 2016. And I got up there and was on my own, and I don't know. I just finally said, I'm ready to not hide this part of me anymore, and it's not going away. And by the way, I'm glad you brought up healing, because then this ties in, if we're going to get into the coming out part. It was my Pentecostal faith that led me to coming out. um, the joke well, it's not really a joke, but it is kind of tongue in cheek. I said, I was always taught to follow the Spirit. It's not my fault the Spirit led me right out of the closet. Somebody once said, why would you bring Jesus into your coming out? I said, honey, who do you think opened the door? Called Lazarus out of the tomb. He called me out the closet. But so being on my own and being nobody to judge me, nobody to really say anything, I allowed myself to meet somebody and have my first kiss and my first other such adult experiences at the same time in seminary housing. The things that went on in that apartment. But
with some laying
I
on
mean,
the hands and some speaking in tongues, you
yeah,
said?
well, yeah. And as you can imagine, I'm sure you understand what I mean when I talk about a gay puberty. I think we all, especially that grew up in the church, once we come out, we do have a bit of a wild stage. And so I discovered Grindr. And as you can imagine, in a conservative religious town, how easily accessible, how much that would light up like a Christmas tree. And there was no, there was very easy access to a lot of things. And as I say, I went from the Virgin Mary to the whore of Babylon rather quickly. um, but it was through that, and that I was also looking at other spiritual things, paganism, Reiki, New Thought. And so while doing the seminary thing, some Sundays I would sneak to Chattanooga and go to the Unity Church there. And I really kind of realized that not only am I, accepted, because I knew that even if I finished seminary, that by saying, okay, now I'm out. I'm out to myself. I'm out to important people around me. I just wasn't out to my family yet, and officially. And I knew, I was like, I've got to figure out what I'm going to do after this, because once I'm public about being a gay person, all of this is going to go away. And I knew it was. And I had kind of really made peace with that, honestly. And a friend of mine had their Reiki attunements, and I had known about Reiki because I'm one of these anime nerds and stuff. So I love Japanese culture and things. And so Reiki, of course, came across being a Japanese healing method, it was something I knew about. As a matter of fact, I remember going to prayer groups praying against a Reiki clinic that was in Marion at one time. And so I found a massage therapist that was a teacher. And I said, can you teach me? And will you take small payments for the lessons? Because I'm a poor college student. And she did. So I got my Reiki 1 and my Reiki 2 attunements from her. And as I've said at Wild Goose and stuff, one of the things that a Reiki attunement will do is it will open all of those channels it will unlock doors that you thought you had lost the keys to. And it can blow up your life sometimes. And
Would you be willing to share more about it opening doors and potentially blowing up your life?
Yeah, well, the quick and Reader's Digest version is about 2 weeks after I got my Reiki attunements. I came out to my mother, and about 2 months after that, my great grandmother passed away, and I uh, I went back home. I didn't. I was out to mom. The family knew. She did. My great grandmother didn't. She's the only one I didn't come out to, and I did that out of respect for her. And the family had asked that I not, because she was already not doing well. And she was our matriarch and the absolute rock that we all had. And life has never been the same since she passed. It's been about a decade now, and nothing, life has just never been the same since, and it never is when you lose someone that important. And I talked about her incessantly at seminary. So when they found, well, and see, I picked a very turbulent time to move away. I wasn't at seminary a month before a very close great uncle passed away. Uh, a few months that was in July of that year, and then in October of that year, my grandfather died. um, so it's like, and then about a year and a half after that, Mama passed away. So it was just boom, 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 and uh, so many things transpired and happened, and that I realized, okay, now I'm not going to finish seminary. I don't have it in me. I got very depressed in Cleveland because I was away from my family. I'm very Appalachian in that way. I was only 3.5 hours away, but it felt like I was in another continent. I actually took, before I did all the coming out stuff, I actually had to take a mental health leave of absence because I needed to go home. um, there was always such a visceral shift when I would cross the border from Tennessee into North Carolina, back into North Carolina. Once I was back in North Carolina, everything felt right again. And I didn't realize how much my mental health was connected to being near my family, and being even to the geography. You know, I don't like to be away from even to this day, I don't like to be away from North Carolina long. Um, and But yeah, all of that's just, and it may not have been the Reiki attunements that blew my life up. It may have been the fact that my life would have blown up no matter what I did because of the circumstances and whatnot. But Reiki was definitely a. I don't know if I would have blown through that last major door of coming out to my family without it. And I knew there was just, I get looking back now, Beck, I think there was just something in me that said, I'm not going to live in the shadows. This is not, if I'm going to be completely who and what I am, I'm not going to do it quietly. I have never done anything in my life quietly. It's not what I do. I've tried, but it's going to bust out somewhere. And I didn't want to hide it anymore, and I didn't. And my mother has been fantastic. Um, she's still conservative. She still believes how she believes, but she has made more of a shift than I could ever hope anybody would. And the family, they still talk to me. They still love me. They don't agree with me, which is problematic in its own way. But like I said, I've been very lucky in my coming out experience. Um, in a lot of regards. Is it perfect? No, but is it anywhere near what it could have been? And like I said, again, horror stories that I've heard from other people, no, thankfully it has not. But yeah, Reiki. So I was attuned old school style. So it was where a master teacher actually energetically opens your crown chakra and puts the symbols or the mantras of Reiki in and into your hands, and it really kind of rewires the spiritual frequency. Because the way I've described it at Goose is, if you can imagine having a regular AM and FM radio, and then you modify Reiki is like modifying that radio to now pick up on radio XM. It's not it's not even necessarily a special frequency, it's just a different frequency. And just like you need a special equipment to pick up satellite radio, you have to have it, that's how that works. And when you open up the chakras, when you open up the energy centers in your body, you are open to a whole new world, really, and things start to happen. A lot of people who initially have their first Reiki session and attunements, we call it a healing crisis. Sometimes their symptoms get worse for a while because it's, if you think, we have that in non-woo-woo sense too, because I take SSRIs, I take Prozac. I'm not ashamed of that. I'm very open about that. And if you've ever took one of those, you know that within the first couple of weeks of being on that type of medication, sometimes your symptoms are going to get worse because your body is adjusting to, in my case, just out of nowhere, my brain one day said, serotonin, we no longer know her. And so for the first couple of weeks, my symptoms were more intense because suddenly my body and brain were reintroduced to Miss Serotonin. So it's the same thing with Reiki energy, I think, in that regard, is that you go through your life with your religious upbringing and spiritual upbringing, being attuned to only certain, in my case, and in probably your case too, one specific type of spiritual frequency. And you quickly realize as you open up and as you read more spiritual books and you find things and you see things and you hear things, you realize that's not the only frequency out there. And when you're open to it, sometimes I think your spirit and your body and stuff don't really know what to do with it at first. It's like everything is readjusting. And I have to keep in mind that I basically came out of the closet and had my Reiki attunements within months of each other. So my system kind of I kind of went through a total system reboot all at once, because suddenly, like I said, 6th generation Pentecostal, my whole life revolved around church. My whole life revolved around being a minister. I was Donald, the Pentecostal minister. That's what I thought my life trajectory was going to be, and that's what I put everything toward. And naturally, because of how the most, if not all, major Pentecostal denominations view LGBTQ people, when I realized that that was what I was going to do, that I was going to live out and proud, and that I was going to transition into a different type of spirituality, because this all happened kind of at the same time. You know, it was gradual at first, and then when it was time, it all happened very quickly and rather undramatically in some regards. So if you want a quick story about, I was not kicked out of seminary. I was not kicked out of the Assemblies of God. I let it go. I I sent an email to the Assembly of God. I said, I no longer align. I'm not doing this anymore. So and they tried to say it was almost a "you can't quit us, we quit you" thing. They're like, you can't really turn in your credentials. You have to be dismissed. And I said, dismiss me if you have to. And I guess eventually they did. I still get bereavement notices, so I don't know if they've bothered to take me off the roll or not. But and I left seminary and came back home. So my spiritual trajectory in life, when it was time to let go of something, I don't know why. And it's not to say I feel like I'm more spiritual or anything, but in my particular experience, when it was time to let something go, it was not hard to let it go. I would have thought that letting go of basically everything that I had ever worked for spiritually would have been hard, but it wasn't. It just wasn't. It was, this is my life now. And I tell people, and it's kind of for shock value, but also it's true. I think coming out was my real baptism in the Holy Ghost.
Definitely a baptism by fire in many ways,
Yeah.
right?
Because once I accepted that truth about myself, I felt free for the first time, really free. That now when I come to, whether it's Reiki or whether it's Nichiren Buddhism or whatever spirituality I'm coming to it with my whole self. And that's why I think it's more powerful. And not to get theo nerd here, but I think the biggest sin, if you will, that the Pentecostal church commits to the LGBTQ community is, and also to get new. So let me back up. I get ahead of myself. It's an ADHD thing. A big word in Pentecostalism is holiness, because at least in my tradition stemmed from Wesleyanism. We were also called Wesleyan Pentecostals. We came from the holiness movements, the Nazarenes, the Methodists, the Wesleyans, the Church of God Anderson. We were from that tradition, and then the founders experienced the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and then that was added on. So this whole idea of sanctification and being made holy has always been a big part. And when I was introduced to New Thought, I came to the realization that real holiness, true holiness, equals wholeness. And that the degree to which you are whole is the degree to which you are holy. So, go ahead.
I love that. I love that. Yes.
Yeah. So, if you think about what the conservative church, was specifically the Pentecostal church, asks LGBT people to do, is you're going to take this part of yourself that we know now, all the scientists know, all sociologists know, all the people but the church seems to know, is hardwired into us. That we were, to quote Lady Gaga, we were literally born this way. And it's just how we are. And that goes for any person on the LGBTQ. I'm not just talking about being gay or bisexual or straight. I'm talking about your gender identity. I'm talking about your gender expression. I'm talking about queerness in general. You either are or you aren't. And it's an integral part of who we are. It might not be the whole of our identity, but it is most certainly, it's there. Just like being straight for heterosexual people is there. And see, but at least in the midst of the conservative Pentecostal church telling straight people, that there's boundary lines around their sexuality. They still have an outlet. You get married and you have children. They still have a pathway to express their sexuality and their sexual orientation. So they have an access to more wholeness than we do, because, and this is where I'm getting at the main sin part against LGBTQ people. What they tell us to do is to take this part of ourselves and not just put parameters around it like they do for straight people, not just to put the parameter of marriage around it, but to say, this part of you will keep you from the presence of God. So it must be shut off completely. It has to be suppressed, repressed, delivered, whatever. You shut that door, you lock it, you swallow the key, and you never open it again. Because, and even if you do that, and even if you do live a life of celibacy, you're still looked at as second class. Let's be real about it. I'll never forget when I went to my ordination service for the Assembly of God. There was a few little events, a little dinner that I was late for because I'm ADHD and I'm going to be late for my own funeral. But not to mention the fact that that Pentecostal time's about 10 minutes later than everybody else's. But so they had on the projection screen the names of the people that were going to be ordained that night. And beside it was like a spreadsheet. And beside it was the name of the person's spouse. Okay. So here's everybody's name that was there, and everybody was married, I think, except for me. And do you think they just left that blank for me? It said right there on the billboard for everybody to see, Donald Guffey, not married. So even if you are celibate, they're going to say, why aren't you married? Why don't you have children? It's like they want you to suppress it, but they put you in situations where you're always going to have to bring it up. Right. But what this is, this is such a metaphysical wounding, because in order to make us holy, they withhold holiness from us. Because what did I say at the beginning? Holiness equals wholeness. The degree to which you are whole is the degree to which you are holy. And they make us, as LGBTQ people in the conservative church, they force us into this purgatorial realm.
Sure.
Of never being able to achieve true holiness, because we can never be whole until we acknowledge that part of ourselves and we let it be free. This is why, and here's the thing, what happens, we're finding it out. We see it in the church news every day. When you suppress good, healthy, normal sexuality, it is going to come out somewhere.
Yeah.
And it often comes out and in very destructive ways. How many times a day do you see in your social media feeds of yet another conservative minister who has some kind of child SA thing come up? And it's like,
yeah,
no wonder.
Yeah.
Because you teach people to do everything about their sexuality in the dark.
Right. It's an unhealthy and unhealing place.
Yeah,
Ronald, I think I want to have you back on to talk a little bit more about some other things, but I know we're getting close to the hour. If there's people out there that are interested in your services, how do they contact you? And what services are you offering right now for pay or barter or
right
increase?
now, not much, but I am considering very much opening back up for a distance Reiki session. So what that is, so we know that energy goes anywhere and can be anywhere. So we are using an exchange of energy right now. You are in, I believe, Georgia.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm in North Carolina. We are talking as if we're in the same room right now. So energy healing is the same way. You don't actually have to be in the room with somebody when you do it. So you can make appointments with me. My email address is Rev Donald Guffey, Donald, Guf as in Frank, F as in Frank, EY at gmail.com. I don't mean to insult anybody's intelligence when I say F as in Frank. It's just that with my accent, you wouldn't believe the last names I get on packages. I've got everything from Gussie, Guppy, Guthrie,
All
but
of
it is
them.
but it is Guffey, Guffey. So Rev Donald Guffey at gmail.com. I am on Facebook as, let me look it up really quickly because I forget. My memory is crap. um,
Donald Lynn Guffey Jr.
Donald Lynn Guffey Jr. And I'm on TikTok as Reiki Rev. So
Oh, I love that.
I
Reiki.
recently got back on to TikTok. I let my first account go when the bans and everything was going through, and had about 3,000 followers. Let it go, and now I'm starting all over again. But my new moniker is. I didn't mean for that to. I'm glad you woke up this morning and chose violence, TikTok person. But, these are 5 conditions. No, that's not what I wanted you to do. There we go. Okay. At Reiki Rev 0
Excellent. Love that.
is what that. Yeah, Reiki Rev 0. And
Donald, go ahead.
and I talk about spiritual things. I do little Reiki sessions. You can reach out to me and we could probably schedule one. And if I charge, I'm very reasonable. I do $1 a minute.
That's awesome. That's
And
awesome.
because one of the things I I I believe in equivalent exchange.
Sure.
Because and every Reiki certification that I have gotten because people helped me financially and
Mm.
people helped me make small payments. And because once you get into the world of Reiki, you realize how expensive this stuff gets. And I believe so much in its ability to help people that I just cannot charge exorbitant amounts for
Yeah.
it. I want it to be as accessible for anybody. And believe me, even if I say $1 a minute, if you're in a dire need and you cannot pay me, still reach out to me.
Mm.
Okay. I mean,
Thank you, Donald.
and if you're a part of another type of healing modality, like I know, Beck, you do somatic stuff and stuff. I do believe in bartering as well. I'll do session for session.
Yeah, that's lovely.
And, but yeah, that's mostly what I'm doing. You can see some of my sermons and stuff on our church's website, I believe. It's called Unitarian Universalist Church of the Catawba Valley. I'll actually be
Nice.
co-leading a service this Sunday. And
This is random, but I found out that I have Catawba ancestry in, I think it's Waccamaw and
oh wow,
Chira people from some of that area, and apparently
yeah.
they were nearly wiped out when the colonists came. So,
Hmm.
anyways, fascinating Appalachian kind of stuff. Well,
Absolutely.
y'all say goodbye to my Appalachian sibling. And Donald, as we part, you got 1 minute. What would you like to tell the audience today?
Everything that I have been through and everything that I have experienced and all the spiritual work that I have done, I have come to realize one main thing. Well, a couple of main things, and that is love is all that there is. That's the true oneness. That's the true power. If it comes from love, and love, not to be trite, but love is love. If it's love, it's divine. And your love, I'm love. every person you meet, including yourself, let me say that again, including yourself, is divinity defined. You are God being God as you. Whatever that shows up at is me. It's God showing up as an Appalachian queer. In you, it might be God showing up as a woman, as a queer person, as a trans person, as a disabled person, as an autistic person, as a person with Down syndrome. God is all of those things.
I love
And
that.
you're a perfect representation of that. And if that can't heal what ails you, I don't know what can. And because it's so true. The main thing that I walk away from at the end of the day is that it all boils down to love. And as long as you're operating from a loving place, you're operating from a godly place.
I love that. That's Donald Guffey, the Reiki Rev, y'all. Reiki Rev Zero on TikTok and Reverend Donald Guffey at gmail.com for sessions. May the Lord bless you, strengthen you, encourage you, my sibling. I'll see you in a couple of weeks at the Wild Goose Festival.
Okay, excellent.
All right. Bye, Donald. If you want to hang out for a second, I'll
Okay.
stop the recording.